Russia marks the 80th anniversary of Victory Day with a military parade in Red Square in Moscow to mark the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany during World War II. Alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin, it is anticipated that the leaders of China, Kazakhstan, Laos, Guinea-Bissau, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, Turkmenistan and Cuba will attend. As you can see, the live visuals now we are currently showing you. President Putin is expected to address the crowd later in the day at 7 o'clock GMT. At the parade, to give you more updates on this and more information, which you are currently tuning into, there you see the Chinese president, the guest of honor, Xi Jinping, alongside Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Moscow is currently hosting 29 foreign heads of state, including, as I previously mentioned, China's Xi Jinping, along with Brazil's Lula da Silva, Europe obviously being mostly absent due to the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine and also conflict in the country's west. As you can see now, marching processions through the streets of Russia's Red Square, the center of the Russian capital, Moscow, just in the background of the Kremlin. The scale, in terms of scale of this event, it's a very grand occasion in the Russian capital. Around 9,000 troops gather to march and take part in the parade. 75 ground weapons will be shown and paraded through the streets of the Red Square. As you can see there, Moscow's grand Orthodox architecture in the Red Square, the center of Russian power. There you can see the famous, iconic St. Basil's Cathedral, very iconic in Russian architecture, and in many ways the building that most people think of when they think of the Russian capital. Putin previously finished an 11-minute address calling today a turning point for civilization, flanked by Xi Jinping and 27 other heads of state. The ground column, as you can see, 9,000 troops and 75 vehicles rolled as planned, while a trimmed 12-jet flypast squeaked through patchy cloud at around 11:25 a.m. A Chinese PLA honor guard marched for the first time since 2015 in the Russian capital. Security has maintained tense during the event. This obviously happens during a self-imposed ceasefire. There you can see the visuals of the 9,000 troops in attendance, the 9,000 Russian troops. This falls on the backdrop of a self-imposed ceasefire by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, in the background of this, the ongoing conflict. Kiev has not agreed to the ceasefire and has logged the total so far at 734 Russian ceasefire violations in the first 12 hours of the self-declared truce, and Zelensky has labeled it a parade farce. The ceremony as it goes, the speech themes, which Putin mentioned, he invoked the USSR's 27 million wartime dead. Russia lost the most troops in the Second World War out of any country by far, 27 million dead, which would have been wrapped up 80 years ago today. They warned of forces of rewriting history and equated today's conflict with the Soviet fight against Nazism, but avoided direct nuclear threats in his speech. There's been many diplomatic sidelines to this event. We've had a Xi Putin joint statement where the leaders pledged to oppose unilateral sanctions, and they've blasted in NATO encroachment in the Asia-Pacific, a region they both share and both hold an alliance. Putin accepted an invitation to a China V-Day commemoration in the month of September this year. You also have BRIC top 6 in play here, where President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and Myanmar's military junta leader, Min Aung Hlaing, who joined together for a brief photograph on the Red Square, with EU and G7 leaders absent. Serbia's leader, however, has come to the parade despite regional pressure, one of the only two leaders from Europe. The others being Slovakia's Fico, who made a late morning appearance after earlier illness rumours. As you can say, during the grand ceremony, there is a current backdrop of conflict. Obviously, Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, where there have been over 100,000 people killed so far. These 29 leaders have taken this ceremonial event as a stance towards the West and towards the European Union, and showed condonance with Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, which the Russians obviously call the special military operation.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с 80-й годовщиной победы в Великой Отечественной войне!
See the Russian defense minister currently addressing his troops. Andrei Belousov, the 9,000 troops in attendance standing in uniform line, showing Russia's military strength, obviously, with the backdrop of the current war going on both in their country and in Ukraine's. If you're just joining us and viewing, this is the Red Square in Moscow, where Russia are hosting 29 foreign heads of state who align with them despite Western sanctions and international condemnation from other countries. These 29 leaders have specifically joined Vladimir Putin at this very special day, accepted his invitation. There you see President Xi Jinping with Vladimir Putin. He has been invited as the guest of honor. This ceremony celebrates Victory Day, otherwise known as VE Day, which marks the end of the Second World War, where the Allies accepted the surrender of Nazi Germany back in 1945.
Товарищ Верховный Главнокомандующий Вооруженными силами Российской Федерации, войска Московского гарнизона к параду в ознаменовании 80-й годовщины Победы в Великой Отечественной войне готовы. Министр обороны Российской Федерации Белоусов.
Where are you finding this from?
Дорогие граждане России, дорогие ветераны, уважаемые гости, товарищи солдаты и матросы, сержанты и старшины, мичманы и прапорщики, товарищи офицеры, генералы и адмиралы. Поздравляю вас с 80-летием Победы в Великой Отечественной войне. Сегодня всех нас объединяют чувства радости и скорби, гордости и благодарности, преклонения перед поколением, которое сокрушило нацизм.
Russian President Vladimir Putin address 9,000 troops as well as an audience, as well as 29 foreign leaders led by China's President Xi Jinping, among many others, including Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, along with Brazilian President Lula da Silva, all of who have accepted invitations to this ceremony, despite Western condemnation for Vladimir Putin's Russia in Ukraine, despite economic sanctions. These 29 heads of state attend and show that they do in fact still support the Kremlin in their war efforts against Ukraine. This is a monumental ceremony. It marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, otherwise known as. In order to mark this, Vladimir Putin declared a 72-hour truce in his ongoing war. The man you see speaking, who declared a war on Ukraine. He invaded Ukraine in the month of February of 2022. We are now, as the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year. In his address, Putin is expected to frame the parade as proof that Russia remains unafraid despite the war. Western leaders' absence will be portrayed as irrelevant, while the presence of BRICS partners is touted as diplomatic vindication. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was previously expected to be in attendance. However, since Operation Sindoor, he then cancelled his trip to Moscow and attended matters at home.
только победу. Дорогие друзья,
Here, Putin is speaking currently about the 27 million wartime dead that Russia suffered during the Second World War. He warns of forces rewriting history and equated today's conflict with the Soviet fight against nationalism. Nazism, apologies, Nazism, not nationalism, but he previously avoided nuclear threats. The Soviet Union, obviously, previously, we've seen symbolism, that hammer and sickle, that iconic old flag of the Soviet Union, who held most of Eastern Europe post-World War II. Putin is a known admirer of the previous efforts of formerly the Soviet Union and now Russia. He sees it as a great tragedy that Alexander Khrushchev gave up and disbanded the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Many people think that this is what he wants to recreate with his war in Ukraine. He wants to gain that territory back.
Героизм народа был массовым. Все республики несли общую тяжелую ношу войны. Огромным был вклад жителей Средней Азии и Закавказья. Отсюда бесперебойно шли эшелоны со всем, в чем нуждался фронт. Здесь размещались госпитали и нашли свой второй дом сотни тысяч эвакуированных людей. С ними делились кровом, хлебом, сердечным теплом. Мы чтим каждого ветерана Великой.
I want to just give you a list of the 29 heads of state that are currently in attendance and align with Russia in their war in Ukraine, seemingly. We have the major partners, which include guest of honor, Chinese President Xi Jinping. Brazil's President Lula da Silva is in attendance. European presence, the continent which they are currently in. The only two from the continent, that being the Serbian head of state, President Aleksandar Vučić, and Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, who arrived after airspace detours. You also have post-Soviet and Eurasian allies. Some of these nations used to be part of the Soviet Union, which Putin admires so greatly. You have Armenian heads of state, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, Belarus, who is there, Alexander Lukashenko, President Alexander Lukashenko, one of the longest reigning leaders in the world today. You have Kazakhstan's premier, Kyrgyzstan's premier, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan's leader, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. You also have some allies from South and East Asia too. You have Prime Minister Min Aung from Myanmar, the junta leader, who took control of the country of Myanmar in 2021 with his military coup. He is there when his country still reels from the aftermath of the earthquake that happened just a few weeks ago. You also have Vietnam, who's making a presence. The party General Secretary to the LAM is there, and also the Mongolian president.
Высоко ценим вклад в нашу общую борьбу солдат союзнических армий, участников сопротивления, мужественного народа Китая, всех, кто сражался во имя мирного будущего. Дорогие друзья, мы будем и впредь держать равнение на ветеранов, на их искреннюю любовь к родине, на их решимость защищать отчий дом, ценности гуманизма и справедливости. Придадим этим традициям, этому великому наследию самое главное в нашем сердце и передадим это будущим поколениям. Всегда будем опираться на наше единство в ратных и мирных делах, в достижении стратегических целей, в решении задач во имя России, ее величия и процветания. Слава народу-победителю! С праздником! С Днем Великой Победы! Ура!
Concludes the president's speech. The ceremonial traditions continue, firing of artillery, the showcase of weapons as Russia's grand ceremony continues. President Vladimir Putin he spoke about saying that it is Russia's duty to defend its dignity of the soldiers of the Russian army. The Kremlin leader says Russian society is supporting the participants of the special military operation, which is what the Russians label their ongoing war in Ukraine. He also says truth and justice are on our side. Putin then spoke about the Second World War and says that almost 80% of the population was involved in the war and defeated the Nazis. Putin, of course, the Soviet Union formerly allied against Germany with the countries like the British, like France, much not the case today. It is with the only two representatives from Europe there present, that being Serbia and Slovakia. Along with them involved is Chinese President Xi Jinping, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, and Brazilian Premier Lula da Silva. Putin is now paying tribute to the veterans who fought during the Second World War. He says, "We will look upon our veterans who displayed true love for the motherland, who decided to defend their home," he says. "We will always have this in our heart, and we will keep it for our future generations, and we will display our unity in military and civil affairs in achieving goals for Russia and the welfare of Russia." He finished his speech saying, "Glory to the people who won the war." There you can see Chinese President Xi Jinping there, sat in the audience, along with many other heads of state. As we've said previously, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was meant to be in attendance at this parade. He had to pull out due to the obvious ongoing Operation Sindoor. Now let's take a look a bit more at the celebrations. Putin just spoke of the Russian veterans who died during World War II, with most of them being ethnic Russians. Russia had the highest number of deaths during the Second World War. I just want to give you a breakdown of these numbers. They are quite significant. Military deaths from the conflict was around 8.7 to 11 million Soviet soldiers that died, including those killed in action, either missing or in captivity. The civilian deaths in Russia are between 15 and 18 million. A significant amount of people who Russia lost. Civilians perished due to massacres, bombings, starvation, disease and other war-related causes. It remains one of the highest death tolls in any conflict in human history. This is who Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, was just paying homage to in his speech. 80 years ago today, victory over Nazi Germany was declared by the Allied forces, which included that of the Soviet Union, France, Britain, and many other countries. I want to delve into a bit more into Putin's speech, as we did not have the translation coming out live. He spoke of the 27 million Soviet war dead and called them immortals, something that we've previously mentioned. And he also, of course, references to the Ukrainians as a Nazi force, calling them the new Nazism. And he claimed that Russia is fighting against them and international terrorism to protect Donbass, and justifies the invasion as a moral sequel to 1941 to 1945. He also says that the Western nations have unleashed a war on Russia, and he described a war unleashed against our quote-unquote motherland and a turning point for civilization. And he recasted Moscow as the victim and not the aggressor. He then went on to attack Western exceptionalism and accuse Western elites of erasing history, imposing rules, and destroying family values. He frames the conflict as cultural as well as military. He then came in with some praise for BRICS nations and the Global South, where he allowed foreign guests and a multipolar world of fair opportunity, and he signalled diplomatic backing despite Western boycotts. When he's talking about this, he's obviously talking about the sanctions put on Russia by the West after the invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. He then led a moment of silence and hailed soldiers in Ukraine as worthy heirs of 1945. This blends reverence with rallying round the flag rhetoric. Some notable sound bites for you here. We will remember those who fell and became immortals, Putin said when talking about the 27 million Russians killed in the Second World War. He says a war has once again been unleashed against our motherland, but we are fighting back, when referencing about the current conflict going on in Ukraine. He as well said that Western elites preach exceptionalism and erase the memory of Nazism. He said a fair multipolar world is emerging before our eyes. There are some of the statements from Putin's speech there as we watch the celebrations post the ceremony. We are now joined by Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, President of the IDC, Russia, and Director of WH